Hi, I'm Carrie, a stroke survivor and Bind member.
And I'm Kezia, a stroke survivor and member of Bind as well. And for this next couple of episodes, we are going to be focusing on aphasia, since it affects so many brain injury survivors. If you don't know, or if you do, aphasia is a language disorder that affects a person's ability to communicate.
And today we welcome Nikole. She is a speech therapy pathologist. I've actually been working with Nikole for a little over 8 years, so we got to know each other very well. She works at Accel Rehab, and we're excited to have you here today, Nikole.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Welcome to Bindwaves, the official podcast of the Brain Injury Network of Dallas. I'm Brian White, Bind's Executive Director. On each episode, we'll be providing insight into the brain injury community. We'll be talking to members and professionals regarding their stories and the important role of Bind's Clubhouse. We work as a team to inspire hope, community, and a sense of purpose to survivors, caregivers, and the public. Thank you for tuning into Bindwaves. Let's get on with the show.
So I guess first, let's just get started. Tell us a little bit about you. I know a lot about you. A little bit about you.
Tell me.
And then what made you decide to go into speech therapy?
Yeah, so I'm from Carrollton, Texas, born and raised. I went to Stephen F. Austin in Nacogdoches, Texas, for both my undergrad and my graduate degree. And initially, I just wanted to work with children. I loved the kids, and I wanted to be in a classroom and be a teacher, and then it hit me. That's a classroom with all those kids. So then I decided, well, let me see what special ed would do. And so I went down that route, and somebody said, oh, you might like speech therapy and working with children who have autism and MR and Down syndrome. So I explored that, and I did some shadowing with the little one who was autistic one summer, and I liked it, so I was convinced, went to SFA, and then I got into the SLP program, and I had no idea. It was not the shadowing. I had no idea that we worked from birth to geriatrics, and I said I would never work with adults. And I started my first job with children, and I did that for about 14 months, and it wasn't my thing. I loved the kids, but I just wasn't getting fed, and so I came across an inpatient rehab, and I made the change from adults, grad school adults, or from children all the way to adults, that huge change. And I've been doing adult now for over 10 years.
Wow. I actually was just wondering too, I personally had never known about speech pathologists until I needed one.
Yep.
So that was actually one of the things about introducing you and getting to know you as a speech pathologist. What even got you there? I know you said you loved kids, but
right.
Adults is so different.
It is so different. Oh, and I absolutely love it with the adults. They want to get better. They have had that normalcy, and they want to get back to it. The ones with swallowing problems, they want to get back to eating and the thin liquids, and the family just wants to do everything they can. So it's a lot of fun. And then I love to hear their story, asking questions, seeing where they come from, what they love, and just intermingling it and making therapy out of it.
I always laugh when people say that, because I know Valerie was the same way. She worked with kids, and I'm like, y'all know when you're working with brain injuries, you're basically still working with kids.
it might be a little bit that way too.
We're just bigger kids. Sometimes some of us are.
You got to offer the coffee and the graham cracker, versus the juice and the cookie, but we get the job done. But when you said you didn't know what a speech therapist was, it's very common. I walk into the room, and the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, I speak just fine. And I'm like, oh, but what about the tube in your stomach? Or, what about this going on? And they're like, oh, yeah, maybe. So.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the things after having had a stroke, and I needed a speech pathologist, especially because I was told I had aphasia at the time. Yep. So I was like, that's one of my favorite therapists that I've had. Yes, I've had great occupational therapists. Yes, physical therapy is amazing, but speech therapists gave me what I love the most is talking. So I needed it. I needed it back real quick. So honestly, it's been great to learn about them. And I think that one of the conversations that we're really wanting to learn about is aphasia, because it's been something that's I didn't know about it until they told me you have aphasia. I'm like, what? What is that? And same with the family. It's like, what is that? like what is it? And can you describe it to us a little bit?
So with aphasia, it's just really a hard time getting your words out and understanding. It's that comprehension and expression of language. And depending on where it is in the brain, on your stroke, the language part is on the left side. But the main ones, there's global aphasia, and so that's just kind of, they can't read, they can't write, they can't get any of their words out, and sometimes initially a patient will have that, and then as they get better, the global goes away, and then they might be left with bits and pieces. Sometimes the global stays, and then they're just unable to completely communicate. Other times it could be in the Broca's part of the brain or the Wernicke's part of the brain, and so people say, well, how do you differentiate between that? And my little tidbit, if it's in the Broca's part, their speech is broken. They can understand, but they can only get a couple of those words out. And then in the Wernicke's part, it's like they can't really understand as much, but their speech comes out, but it might not make as much sense. And so they think they're making total sense, but you're not understanding them. And it's so heartbreaking because these patients want to get their words out. And some of the best therapy that I've been able to watch is a wife tell her husband that she loved him, for the first time post-stroke. And, we were all in tears.
Yeah.
And it was just literally love you. So hers was more of the Broca's aphasia, where she understood and she knew she couldn't do it, but then these words sometimes would just come out and make perfect sense for her. So it's a hard one.
Yeah, that definitely is. And thank you for sharing that. That was super sweet. It was really sweet. I think right now I feel like I'm learning as you're saying these things for sure, because it is a lot to remember. I think Carrie and I had a conversation earlier this week about how she knows all this vocabulary, and I have aphasia, and I can't tell about the vocabulary. I feel like every day I'm learning something new about brain injury, about strokes, and being in this environment, it's it's really helpful for me and for my family, and who needs this information. So honestly, thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Well, Kezzy, I don't think I really know all that much. I've just been a survivor for a lot longer than you, so I've been around a little bit more. So
Yeah.
But so you kind of talked about, depending on your stroke or maybe a traumatic brain injury. So what actually gets affected? The language part, how does that get affected that causes aphasia?
It just depends on where the lesion is in the brain and where the stroke or the traumatic brain injury happens, really. Was it, a brain bleed? Was it a clot? Was it a strike to the head? And now I guess with in the news, who is it? Is it Kevin Costner?
Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis, that's right. Bruce Willis, and the progressive aphasia, that's starting to come out. And so a degenerative disease that you just didn't even know was there.
Right.
So it's just that lesion in the brain that gets affected.
Yeah, that's definitely very interesting. So I'm going to kind of connect a little bit with myself and Bruce Willis as well, because I had a lot of questions with Carrie, because she knows this vocabulary better than I do. So it's like, who do I go to? Carrie, there. But for example, for me, I had a stroke and it was on the left side of my brain, and I couldn't say words for the longest, and it was very hard. I only know how to say my brother's name, Emmanuel, and cheese, which I love cheese. But that was all I could say. I seriously couldn't say anything else.
Yeah.
But like you were saying with global, it kind of, with time, it can go away.
Yeah.
Not go away, but the difficulty part still is reading and comprehending it as much as I did before. But practice makes it better. So same with Bruce Willis as to how, when, I don't think I was diagnosed until I was in inpatient therapy. So when does the diagnosis occur? When do people get told that they have aphasia?
I would say as soon as, hospital staff come into contact, they might guess it, but a speech therapist, definitely doesn't have to do the diagnosing of it, but we're the ones that work closer with them. So we have different tests and different batteries that can diagnose the patients with it. But a lot of time when they are straight out of any kind of recovery, and they're not finding their words, somebody is going to, immediately say, oh, that person's got aphasia. You know, and there's a difference between expressive aphasia and receptive aphasia. You might have both. You might have one or the other. But typically, you know, and when you have your stroke or your brain injury, people will not get all of their symptoms right away. So after a stroke, a couple days later, their symptoms set in, and then you realize, oh, they do have aphasia.
So I guess we were talking about, you know, kind of how aphasia is and how you get diagnosed or how you get told.
Yes. And so after a stroke, sometimes symptoms don't come about right away. And a lot of times they're worried about more of the physical symptoms, you know, your arms or your legs or your swallowing. And so then once things kind of relax, then people start looking at, oh, they're having a hard time getting their words out, or they're having a hard time understanding. And so that's kind of when then the speech therapist comes in, and when they are in acute care, you know, you'll be seen by OTPT speech. And then if you're not able to go home, then inpatient rehab is next. And then, of course, OTPT speech again.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think I was told I had aphasia until I saw I received my evaluation.
Yeah.
And then he was the one that explained it to me and my mom. And I'm so thankful that he asked for me to have my best friends come in.
Yeah.
Because that was really, really, really helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying about how it kind of takes a little bit of time for people to figure out that they maybe something's wrong. Because I know Carl, you know, says how he figured it out was he said, I don't know what bright idea the nurse had to put on a Korean foreign film in my room with subtitles.
Right.
I couldn't understand anything they were saying. I couldn't read the stuff that was on the TV. He's like, that's when I knew that something was wrong. He's like, when did I stop being able to read?
Yeah.
And I think that's different too. A lot of people don't associate aphasia, that you just think it's, well, you have problems talking. Well, no, it's all that.
It's all of it.
Is affected, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one thing we were kind of talking about Bruce Willis that I've been questioning since this all came out is, do you have to have a brain injury to get aphasia?
So, and that, not necessarily, that's where his come in. It's a degenerative disease that has kind of taken over for him. And so, and some people want to call it dementia, some people don't, but it's kind of that frontal temporal lobe. And so they don't necessarily have problems with memory, but they have problems with language. And so he wasn't understanding what his family members were saying, and he wasn't getting what he wanted out. And so that, I think, is what led them to that primary progressive aphasia.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. It really is, because like even you had mentioned with Carl, like you don't really know it until you realize it yourself. So that's very, very interesting. Are there some misconceptions about aphasia that you can that kind of comes into mind?
Something that I kind of think of in my way is just that, just because doctors will say, oh, they have aphasia. And I'm like, no, they don't have aphasia. They're confused, but they can get their words out.
Right.
You know, and so a lot of times I feel like they just blame it on aphasia, you know, just because, but there's word finding deficits. You can just, or you just need extra time for processing, where it's not necessarily aphasia. Sometimes I just feel like people just gloss over it and call everything aphasia.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I do, before we move on,
I
do want to remind everyone to make sure to press like on our podcast, and make sure to follow us and check in every Thursday, because we do upload all of this really interesting information. But also, if you want more information, you can always contact Carrie and I over the email bindwaves@thebind.org.
Aphasia. I had a thought while we were talking. I guess it's true. People just say you have aphasia, because I know I did not have aphasia.
Yeah.
But when I first had my stroke, I did have a lot of cognitive issues. My memory was just like finding the word. It wasn't not finding words. It was just really finding memories or remembering what I was supposed to do or what I did yesterday.
And for those that have their brain injury on the right side of the brain, like that's going to be more the cog. That's not necessarily the left side where we, have our language and where we diagnose that aphasia. So I think a lot of times if there's just any kind of confusion, it's easier to just say, oh, they've got aphasia.
Right. And I think one of the things that we also hadn't brought up a lot is what are some ways that you would definitely encourage some patients to really work on, aphasia or like the difficulty with language and communicating?
One thing that I tell patients, and I tell their family members, they come in, I tell them, turn on the TV, discuss with them what's going on, talk about the news, talk about current events, talk about a commercial, talk about a movie they're watching, and just get that conversation going. Now, it depends on the patient because sometimes the TV can be distracting, but, but if the TV is on, it kind of gives them a visual cue, like, oh, okay, so that person is playing a sport. Well, what sport are they playing,
Mm-hmm.
What are they wearing? It can kind of, now, if it's distracting, you can turn it off. I also tell patients, have conversations with family and friends. Just call somebody up out of the blue and check in on them.
Yeah.
Do word searches. Do crossword puzzles. Just randomly look in a room and try and list things and just kind of keep it active.
Yeah, and I think that's really good. One of the things that I was told to do a lot, actually I wasn't told. My family, it was told to my family and friends to let me figure out the words.
Yes.
And if I can't, be like, well, is it a color or where did he get it from? And I still do that a lot. But I think with practice, it just makes it so much easier to speak.
Yes, and that's one thing with my patients. And again, with their family members, I ask them, read the patient. Like if they're struggling, let's not make them struggle, help them out. But if all you ever do is talk for them, then they can't get better.
Right.
We want to kind of read the cues, see how they're feeling, and then ask them, well, show me with your hands. Can you show me with your hands what you're trying to say? Is it in this room? Can you point to me? So it's just definitely try and let the patient get it out first, though. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the hardest things that people who don't understand aphasia and they come in contact with someone that has aphasia that they just do all wrong. And that's, I think, one of the things we really want people to understand. Again, we've talked about just because they can't locate the word or they're not making it perfect sense, it doesn't mean that the brain's not still working and functioning and the intelligence is there. Yeah. It's just, but I mean, that's some kind of not fair too, because as I get older, I just forget words randomly anyway, and that's not aphasia, that's just, I'm old.
Yeah.
So
I think we need to just be comfortable with awkward pauses.
Yes.
Let someone think about it and get their words out, and then it's okay to ask them if they want help, and then just patiently wait,
Yeah, of course. I think I had also, throughout rehabilitation, I had met someone, and this is just some feedback, I think. Would it be a good, if you have a very difficult way of communicating, she had a kind of a
communication board?
Yeah, well, if that's what it is, then yes. She did have that. Yeah. I don't know what it would be called, but it was a board, and it had yes, no, and letters.
Yep, so that's another way to communicate. It's an AAC device, and with that, we can do it as simple as yes, no. So that's kind of what I like to start with a patient. Unfortunately, sometimes those aren't as useful with my adult patients just because maybe they're both receptive and expressive aphasia, so receptively they're not able to identify the pictures as easily, or they're having their visual deficits. But I like to make them just simple to where we can just do yes, no, or their basic needs, a bathroom, food, changing, stuff like that. And then with the more advanced patients, though, there is technology. The iPad is amazing, and there's different kinds of activities and different apps on there where it will actually talk for you. And it'll say, I have aphasia, and it'll say, please give me time. I'm thinking of my words, and you can personalize them.
Oh, that's pretty awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Now, I was going to ask you, as you were talking about that, yes, no. So I have a friend that I know that he gets yes and no incorrect.
Correct. Yep.
So you have to try to not ask yes or no questions,
right,
but ask more general or, less specific questions so that.
Yeah.
And I've found a lot of times if he answers real quick yes, then I repeat the question back to him. So you're sure this is what you want to do? No.
No, yeah. So another with that, you could give, a binary choice. You could say, for lunch, do you want a sandwich or do you want soup? And, it's not yes, no, it's just more of a choice.
Right.
Yeah, so that they can give one word or show them a picture so they can choose.
Wow, interesting. That's really cool. I honestly, I feel like, again, I learn every day being here in this environment. That's what I do.
That's what we're hoping that all of our listeners are learning, because there's a lot to learn about brain injuries and aphasia and all this crazy stuff that happens.
So I do want to bring up that we are going to have, this is a very deep conversation for other brain injury survivors and caregivers and everyone that's been going through this situation. So we're going to have another episode to continue to talk to Nikole. We're so thankful to have her here and having all this career and experience. So I do want to thank you for joining Nikole for right now. You'll see her next week too. And thank all of you guys for listening to us. And if you would like to learn more about Nikole, you can also contact her, and all of her information will be in our resource section. And
again, if you'd like to contact us or anybody here at Bind about any episodes or maybe some ideas, you can email us at bindwaves@thebind.org.
And don't forget, like I said earlier, don't forget to like us and continue sharing and subscribing to us. And if you're listening to us on YouTube, make sure to hit the notify button and listen us to Bindwaves.
You can find us on all your favorite platforms. So
until next time.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to Bind Waves and continue to support Bind and our nonprofit mission.
We support brain injury survivors as they reconnect into the life, the community, and their workplace.
And we couldn't do that without great listeners like you. We appreciate each and every one of you. Continue watching. Until next time.